welcome here. Show 151 on Crypto Voices. Matthew here from Eastern Europe, joined by my co-host from Eastern US, as always, Alec Harris and Halo Privacy. What's going on, Alec?
Hey guys, good to see you.
Good to see you. And today, happy to introduce our special guest, Omid Malekan. He is adjunct professor at Columbia, has written a couple books about crypto and the blockchain, the story of the blockchain, and re-architecting trust. Has educated on Bitcoin and crypto and many things for a long time now, I think probably 10 years. Happy to have you on, Omid, and thanks a lot for joining.
Happy to be on, and thank you for having me.
There's so much we could talk about. Obviously, we just had the Bitcoin conference in Miami, and people are, again, getting back to the scaling debate and clogging up the blockchain and all that. But, a lot of those things, they come and go. There's nuance to a lot of those arguments, but one of the things I wanted to start out with was actually the banking crisis this spring, this late winter spring. You wrote a nice essay. This is kind of where the rubber hits the road for me. If you can withdraw your assets with complete certainty and know that you have it, while also using a banking system, and maybe we'll have a free banking system on Bitcoin in the future as well. But if you can withdraw those assets, that's really the important thing. What did you think about the way that the SVB, Silvergate signature sort of crisis unfolded this winter? And, you got even more draconian speak from the regulators, all that stuff. What was your takeaway after this February, March?
So first, I think the real irony of the regional banking crisis was that it was started by government regulators that were trying to drive crypto out of banking. I don't think this idea gets as much attention as it deserves, because it's the kind of thing that even if you don't care about crypto, you care about banking, and you should care about how your banking regulators behave. And I think they behaved in a way that was shameful because of the current US administration's anti-crypto stance. But then they ended up, it wasn't their intention, but they ended up starting a crisis that enveloped much of the banking system. So for some of your listeners might have heard of what we call Operation Chokepoint 2.0, which was this clearly concentrated effort by various US agencies to deny basic banking services to anyone having anything to do with crypto. And I really think they thought that all that would happen is they would just limit the growth and adoption of this industry by making it harder for exchanges, miners, wallet providers, whoever, from getting bank accounts. But it's sort of like the lab leak theory of banking, which is that they were doing a bit of gain of function research on how to improve, quote unquote, U.S. banking by keeping the big bad crypto wolf out. And instead, they really injected fear. And this is not hearsay. You can go back to early January and read the public memo, the joint memo that was released by various US banking regulators that talked all about why crypto deposits at banks are risky. And even back then, I thought this was a fairly remarkable document, because banking and fractional reserve banking, as many of your listeners probably know by now, is fragile by design. It is, in a way, a confidence game. That's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of the economy is a confidence game, but it's a fragile one where it's the job of the people in charge of it to always remind or try to convince people that the system is safe. Right? This is why, like, the president, if the president ever says anything about banking, they say something like, well, the system is sound. I mean, they kind of have to, right? Because if they say anything but the system is unsound, because they're going to cause panic. So that memo to me was amazing, which is what's like, it was a deliberate attempt to scare people about an industry that already had many billions of dollars worth of deposits within the system. And I think that fear loomed large in the back of the minds of the people who were fleeing Silicon Valley Bank and then later Signature Bank. And then we have all the still unanswered questions about how or why Signature was shut down by the New York regulator, quite likely when it was still solvent, which is also rare. And other people involved, like Barney Frank on the board, have made the accusation that this decision was partly driven by the fact that Signature was a crypto friendly bank. We can't be sure, but it's possible. And that too accelerated the crisis, though, because put yourself in the shoes of, if you're the shareholder, not just the depositor, but the shareholder of any regional bank. And you're always sort of like discounting the risk of the government shutting your bank down because maybe the bank failed. Well, here you have on a Sunday, um, the regulators shut down a solvent bank and wipe out the equity holders. That, I think, sent a very strong message to the shareholders of First Republic and PacWest and every other regional bank that, oh, well, if they can kill that bank's equity while it's still solvent, possibly because it behaved in a way that the government didn't like, they can kill mine. So I'm going to, demand a higher risk premium, and the share price goes down, and that begins a doom loop of depositors fleeing. All of which is to say that, going back to the idea of confidence, the traditional banking system is one way to build a financial system. And it's based on this idea that we have laws and regulations that are created by the legislature and enforced by bureaucrats and regulatory agencies, and they know what they're doing. And with every passing financial crisis and banking crisis and even inflationary crisis, we're starting to see that maybe they don't know what they're doing. And ultimately, to me, that's the opening for crypto. That we, like the title of my book implies, we could now re architect the system to a better system, one that hopefully does not rely on the best intentions and the best behavior of so many people.
So I like to focus a lot on the base, base money, and
Mm-hmm.
if you can withdraw that, and that's just like withdrawing physical cash from a bank, but obviously we're moving into a world that's more digital. We have been for a long time, and this is just what the young generation understands. That's one part of it. And then another part of it, of course, is how you scale this economy, how you make those payments, how you can stay efficient, whether you're talking on the base layer or a more abstracted layer that still relies on the base layer security. What are your thoughts there about how, just generally how Bitcoin or crypto in general is going to compete and possibly replace the current system at scale without relying on that trust of those third parties?
So I am much more of a middle of the road type person when it comes to that question. And while I think it is important and good to make the core of the financial system as decentralized as possible, and importantly, for everyone to always have the ability to defect to that core. And I think this is what you were saying about your ability to withdraw. Like, to me, one of the things that's so powerful and remarkable about Bitcoin, if we think of it as a network infrastructure, is that anyone on the planet can use it for any reason. And it doesn't matter if you're the world's largest corporation or if you are just a oppressed minority in some kind of a totalitarian country. I, I mean, there are fees to be paid, and there have to be fees to be paid because this being a scarce resource, we need a way to figure out who gets to use it. Um, but other than that, unlike how pretty much everything else in the rest of the economy works, like you and I don't get to go to the Federal Reserve and say, like, I would like an account with you. The Federal
Yeah.
Reserve says, no, only banks, like JP Morgan get an account with me. You have to go open an account with JP Morgan. And that's not just how banking and money works. It's how the stock market works. It's how the bond market works. It's really like the entire financial system is based on this architecture that a few elite, highly powerful, pseudo governmental organizations get access to the best, and the rest of us get access to them, which means that they get to deny us access when they feel like it, or if the government compels them to, and charge us whatever fees they feel like, and we have to take it. Bitcoin isn't like that. You and I could use non custodial layer one Bitcoin whenever we want to. So I think that's the win. And that's what's truly unique and better about Bitcoin and crypto in general. However, as you were alluding to, Matthew, it doesn't scale very well. And while I think it's very important to do everything we can to upgrade layer one to be more scalable without sacrificing decentralization, um, and it's also very important to build, experiment and build out layer two solutions. um, I'm actually also okay with custodial solutions. Some of the most popular ways that people access crypto is through an exchange or a custodial wallet provider. And I'm okay with that because, first of all, the non-custodial stuff, as someone who uses it all day, is still just really not ready for prime time. And I'm still not sure. I'm optimistic that like non-custodial wallet solutions and all of that will improve significantly from where we are today. But I'm still not sure what the end state is where like my mother's comfortable using it. And to put it more simply, I'm comfortable with my mother using it without making some kind of a mistake or being tricked or hacked. So, I've told my mother to just use a custodial service for now. Um, but I'm okay with that. I don't think that is a failure or a compromise of our principles, because a new financial system where most people are using a custodial service but can still defect to layer one whenever they feel like it is still significantly better. And the fact that us as customers, like if I'm an exchange customer and I can do that, will keep that exchange, that wallet provider, a lot more honest. It also means that there's always going to be a lot more competition from these custodial service providers, which is another thing we don't get from the traditional system, right? Like, I don't know what it takes exactly to build a new stock exchange that will compete with the New York Stock Exchange. I would have to guess, at least 10 years and at least $10 billion, and then a lot of political connections and favoritism. But anybody can build a new Bitcoin exchange or wallet tomorrow. And that's why we already see like such a much more dynamic set of services, from custodial services in crypto versus custodial services in TradFi. So I think scaling, hopefully, 10, 20 years from now, will be like a combination of all three.
Until the banking license comes in for crypto exchanges, and
Yes,
that's a
yes. I mean
requirement.
and that's going to be, and some of them will sadly, if they're not already, lobby for that, because licenses are the best moats.
I very much have a similar view, actually. I like that Hal Finney, 2010 view that banks eventually could be just the ones using base money Bitcoin, and other people who really want to make payments, can use it's basically fiduciary media. It's a custodial service, but of course that's not the vision of like the primary, a lot of the hardcore Bitcoin folks, and I think a lot of people just in general in crypto, like they want to make payments in a decentralized, distributed way. So
Mhm.
I think it's still an interesting topic. Like, do you have any particular view on, say, Bitcoin versus things that are happening with stable coins or something else on Ethereum, or versus Lightning versus Fedimint or any other solutions like that, which you think could be interesting?
So I love stable coins, and I love them in part because I don't see them as an alternative to Bitcoin. I see them as an alternative to uh, you know, checking accounts and Western Union and credit cards. Um, and I think they're also so far have proven in some ways to be the killer application of crypto beyond just the store of value, or even beyond just a speculative thing. And we see this all the time, where if you look at the countries where one would expect for Bitcoin to be gaining adoption because of hyperinflation, capital controls, etc., you see that Bitcoin is gaining adoption, but so are stable coins, particularly dollar ones. Which, and I think we have to respect why, whereas to like me living in the comforts of New York City in the United States, Bitcoin as a dollar hedge is appealing. We have to respect why to a lower income person in Argentina, it's actually a stable coin and not Bitcoin that's the main appealing thing. The dollar is familiar to them, it has much more broader acceptance, etc. So I am for all of it. To me, the competition was never like between Bitcoin and dollars. Certainly not in the short run. To me, the competition was always the the crypto infrastructure versus the TradFi infrastructure, and stablecoins are primarily of the new infrastructure, which is why they're better, faster, cheaper, more censorship resistant, less discriminatory, etc. So I'm great with those. I do think we need better layer twos for Bitcoin, uh, in part because while I love the Lightning Network for certain applications, I don't think it's the panacea that a lot of people hoped it was. There are certain limitations to it, both technologically and financially, from a cost of capital point of view, which means that the Lightning Network to me is going to be most useful as almost like a clearinghouse for centralized exchanges and custodial wallet providers, which, by the way, that's what it is today. Um, like Jack Mallers of Strike is one of the biggest, loudest proponents of Lightning, which is great, but then Strike is a custodial service all the way. Um, so I'm optimistic, though, that with newer tech and with some lessons learned from what's going on in other communities, like the Ethereum community with Rollup, that eventually we will be able to build better layer twos on Bitcoin. And then with every new scaling infrastructure that we introduce to like the base money, then I think the threshold um, below which you don't need to use a custodial service goes higher.
Interesting. So, um, I want to pivot a little bit because something caught my attention in your bio. So your Genesis story, you say in 2013, 10 years ago, kudos. You got into Bitcoin because your friend asked you to buy her a Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, to help her buy some. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Why couldn't you just do it on her own?
Oh, she was just not as tech savvy. Not that I was that tech savvy, but she was not comfortable. Plus, I was her business manager at the time, so it was kind
Okay.
of my job. And it was one of the single greatest requests that anyone has ever made of me, because at the time I had little interest in Bitcoin, and she basically forced me. She was like, "You work for me. You got to go figure this out." I was like, "Okay, fine." Uh, and this was, I think, like it took me some months to actually, because I knew nothing about it, and I don't have a computer science background. I don't have a cryptography background, so I had to go learn some things. Uh, and there were two parts of that experience that were life changing for me. The first one, so I bought her coins at a exchange, a custodial exchange, but then at the time, this is when like Mount Gox is going to hell. And even for a noob like me, the one thing that was obvious was that you don't want to keep your coins on an exchange. You want to take custody. So I actually had to go figure out what that means. Which is like, I was so naive that I remember when I was going to withdraw the coins and the exchange was like, put in your Bitcoin address here. I was like, what's a Bitcoin address? Would it be like Omid at bitcoin.com? I didn't know anything about the cryptography involved and all that. But I eventually did it, and I just installed like the Bitcoin Core wallet on my desktop. And that first on-chain interaction where I withdrew her coins to my own wallet or her wallet. Um, this sounds a little lame, but it changed my life because before that, I had a Wall Street background. I was a trader and did some other things. And as you guys know, the one thing that is abundantly clear to anyone who works on Wall Street is you never actually own anything. There is
Yeah.
always an army of banks, brokers, clearinghouses, exchanges, whatever, between you and your assets. Like at best, you're three companies removed. And if you don't believe me, by the way, like if you think you own your stocks in your Robinhood brokerage account, you do not own those stocks. Technically, Robinhood doesn't own those stocks. Technically, a single monopolistic corporation called Seed and
DTCC.
DTCC, literally one company owns every public share of every company in America. And, for benefit of you, 5 layers down, but that leads to problems, as we saw during the whole like meme stock meltdown. Anyway, so the first thing that blew my mind was like, what? the wallet literally was like, your Bitcoin is here. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, this is a purely virtual digital thing, and somehow it's here. And this got the wheels turning in my head, because in conjunction with the fact that at that point in time, everybody was actually criticizing or mocking Bitcoin, particularly Wall Street people, because of Mt. Gox. And they would say things, and I had friends who were working at the banks, and at the time they would be like, look at how stupid this Bitcoin thing is. A lot of it got stolen and you can't even get it back. And I still have that sentence etched in the back of my mind, because I'm like, yes, for the first time in the history of the internet, something that's purely digital was stolen and you can't get it back. And that, I have a better vocabulary now. I can communicate as being digital scarcity. And I think digital scarcity is one of the greatest achievements of modern times. And that might sound hyperbolic to some people, but scarcity is the fundamental requirement for value to exist. And our entire global economy wouldn't really work if things weren't scarce. And since the dawn of the digital era, the one huge flaw of anything that was digital or even electronic or even virtual, right, including the stocks that you think you own in your Robinhood account, is that there was no real scarcity. The only way to approximate scarcity was to put an army of corporations between you and the asset. And that comes with costs like fees during the best of times, and the risk of catastrophic collapse, like in 2008 during the worst of times. So in 2013, I knew almost nothing about any of this, but I did have this spark, this epiphany that digital scarcity will solve many of the world's worst problems. And I think a decade later, I was wrong about how long this would take. That's the one thing I've been consistently wrong about. But I think we are now, as we're seeing with everything from Bitcoin to stable coins to even like NFTs, tokenized securities, whatever, that we are on the cusp of that form of digital scarcity really revamping the entire global economy.
That's an interesting origin story. And I was told to buy Bitcoin as well. I was instructed to, and that was, so I can relate to that. But what I wanted to ask on the scarcity front, and you write about this a lot in your book, in Re-Architecting Trust. I know you've written more than one book. One of the criticisms is, well, yeah, Bitcoin may have digital scarcity, but anyone can go create a coin and a coin and a coin, and that, we're probably in the thousands of tokens now, right? And
Yep.
so, what's the counter to that?
The counter to that is like Picasso has scarcity, but anybody can go and like draw art. I've always found that to be kind of a foolish argument. Theoretically, yes, sure, and part of the appeal of crypto, because it's decentralized and censorship resistant, is that it is very easy to make copycats of anything. But for that thing to actually be valuable, you need super strong network effects, which Bitcoin has, and virtually nothing else that's ever tried to sort of like go for Bitcoin as this censorship resistant apolitical form of money has ever succeeded. The other thing is security. And I think too often when outsiders look at crypto, they just see the coins and they don't see the underlying infrastructure and the security that it provides. And we three understand that those two things go hand in hand. If one more person tells me that like they like the blockchain but they don't want the cryptocurrency, I'm just gonna start banging my head against the wall. But like, sure, there's Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and SV and Lightning or Dogecoin or whatever, but from a security point of view, none of those things come remotely close. And if anybody like thinks they can launch better Bitcoin tomorrow, good luck, because you will launch something that has virtually no security compared to the original.
I agree with that. So let me back up a little bit. So your book, Re-Architecting Trust. Thank you.
Nice.
It's a great
physical copy.
Well, I mean, speaking of scarcity, right? So it's a great topic. How did you come to wanting to write this book? And then I'd love to actually talk a little bit, and I know I'm breaking the rules of literature, but you've finished it with a topic or with a chapter called respect.
Yeah.
And I think there's a whole philosophical bent to it. And I'd love to get into that a little bit. But why this book?
So the first book I wrote, the story of blockchain, was one which came out 5 years ago. That was my attempt at just trying to explain in the simplest terms possible what this is, what is Bitcoin, what is blockchain, what is a token, etc. And then after having worked in the industry for some years, I wanted to write a book about what this technology changes. And to get that message across, I realized that I had to explain first why the world is the way it is today. So to me, like, if you really want to appreciate the value of Bitcoin as a new type of money, you have to understand, why is money the way it is today? Why is banking the way that it is today? Why is Visa and PayPal the way they are today? And this is also how I learn. So in order for me to really like clarify up my own thoughts about what crypto changes, I needed to have an excuse to go and study a lot about how the world has evolved up to the present.
One of the things I underlined here is you write, and this is in the last chapter called respect. So you write, respect is a second derivative of trust. It takes time to build and is only possible under certain conditions. So I hadn't thought of respect that way, but can you talk about why this concept of respect and its connection to trust?
So as you know, in the book, I don't talk about just what's gone wrong with money or the banking system. I also talk about like what's gone on wrong with big tech platforms in general, governments, etc. And it, in like trying to capture it all in one phrase, I was like, oh, you know what? There's just no respect in this stuff. Like, people don't respect their banks, and their banks don't really respect their customers. I don't think the central banks that issue currencies respect the awesome power that they have. As any of us who've been on crypto Twitter know, people on social media definitely do not respect each other. And this respect is something that's fundamental to my values as a person. And I do think that the failure of our older institutions in the face of digitization is one of the primary explanations for why respect seems to have gone away or declined in so many different activities. And to tie it back to the thesis I was building in the book, um, I had this conclusion that in order for us to be able to better respect each other, we need to both be able to to trust each other, and then trust the institutions which help us interact, whether it's economically or socially. So that's where that idea came about. And when I think about what crypto ultimately enables, I do think it is much more trustworthy infrastructure, which then leads to more respectful human interaction.
I like that. And I'll never miss a chance to dunk on big tech. So you did talk about, fake social media accounts, fake Amazon reviews, just the promulgation of those are the opposite of scarcity, right? You can have,
Mm-hmm.
there are very few limiting reagents on how many fake personas can exist online. And there's some directional things going on with deep fakes and AI that are probably going to make that an alarming trend.
Yeah.
And I once read that if fake Facebook profiles were a country, it would be the sixth largest country in the world. There's like estimated
Wow.
60 million or so. So it's like about a France worth of
Mm.
fake Facebook profiles. And you're right. You say, that they come out and they say we're getting better and we've made it harder. And then another trick emerges, right?
Yep.
And so, these are competing narratives, right? The trend towards digital scarcity and authentic digital artifacts, and this promulgation of like fake narratives, fake identities, and fake content.
Yeah.
So where do they intersect? Who's winning?
Well, obviously the fakes are winning. If anybody doubts that, I recommend like go on Amazon and search for any like generic $5 tchotchke that you can, like rubber bands. Or go on like Wayfair. I'm not singling these out. Go on any online retail site and look for something
Yeah.
completely generic and search for it, and you'll see that like there's 100 options, and each one of them has like 10,000 5-star reviews.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but I've never met someone who decided to take it upon themselves to go review a rubber band. Uh, and so and part of the beauty of crypto is that it is a awesome lens for understanding the rest of the world. So one of the problems that Satoshi Nakamoto solved in a remarkably elegant fashion was the problem of a Sybil attack in the digital domain. So in a world where it's very easy for one person to pretend to be many and then use that to influence outcomes, you can't have certain things. One is you can't have democracy because people can vote over and over again. And so Bitcoin's brilliant solution was proof of work, which is like, yeah, anybody could have as many opinions as they want, but each opinion will cost you money. And I think that some version of that is actually going to save the internet. Because while, like, whether we're talking about fake Facebook accounts or fake reviews and stuff, if we figure out how to first introduce some kind of a cost to that, whether it's like do some kind of work or even like pay for it, just a cost will help reduce the sort of attack vectors via Sybil attacks. And then the other thing that Bitcoin and other crypto networks are really good at is curation. Sort of like figure out like, okay, we're going to have a system, everybody's going to have some skin in the game, and then we're all going to vote on, for Bitcoin we just vote on which transactions are valid. But that's not that different from a social media profile where you want a community to decide which posts are valid. Maybe like first you care about how authentic they are, did they come from the human or a bot, and then you care about the quality of it, right? Like, is this the thing that Twitter should show to everybody or not? um, so I think that's going to be what saved the internet. It's just the more social and generic the application, the more complicated the problem is. So the problem of determining which transactions are valid and having Sybil resistance for money or payment system, I think, is generally solved. Doing that for Instagram is not yet anyway. But the AI thing, I think the point you were making, Alex, is like it's going to make us all speed up trying to solve this problem, because at least the one thing now, you go read that fake review, it's got bad, broken English, and you're like, I'm not sure if that's a person. But now the AI could write fake reviews that are more elegant than what I could write, probably. So we're going to really need a solution soon.
People who are vulnerable now become more vulnerable, though. So, and we were doing an investigation recently, and it was a crypto fraud investigation, and the victim, woman, highly educated, she fell for this romance scam. But what we usually don't see is part of this romance scam involved video calls, and the video calls aligned with the social media persona of the person she met. And
Wow.
so she thought, this must be love, this must be the guy. And the only explanation we've come to, because all of the social media presence was fake, is that she likely interacted with a deep fake video. And so she was already vulnerable, right? And now like much more vulnerable because of the technology. And so you'll have like good AI and people who can engage good defenses and critical thinking, but the Medicaid scam that targets people over a certain age, right? Their vulnerability, I think, increases.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Right.
I think that's what I see.
That sounds disturbingly compelling.
It's probably incumbent on us collectively to protect some of the people who might not know how to defend against emerging technology. And it's just like your example of your mom, right? you said initially a wallet that she would feel comfortable using, but you corrected to a wallet you would feel comfortable with her using.
That's right.
Right? That's the principle right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, the AI thing is too much for me to wrap my brain about, but I do think that better curation and verifiable authentication of content, which we know, the three of us know, like crypto solves that problem very easily if you just have some kind of a registry of people's public addresses and then the ability for them to sign all their content with a private key. Of course, the important thing is that all of this takes place on a decentralized infrastructure, because if it's not credibly neutral in that sense, then it's not going to be very useful.
Yeah. Although one of the challenges I see is there is an obvious trend towards the law abiding or terms of service abiding or kind of like regular use cohort has to prove that they're the good guy
Yeah.
versus like the just identifying the bad actors and weeding them out. And so that's what KYC is, right? You have to show that you're a good guy to use the service, not the other way around. And I think that goes into some of the conversations around digital identity, which
Mm.
I think there's some definite downsides to going that direction.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I love about crypto is that it is a mirror upon what's already there. And I have actually worked in financial services and consulted with regulators and government people on this very question of AML KYC, because the knee jerk reaction is always like, well, bad people do bad things in the TradFi system. That's why we have the Bank Secrecy Act or whatever. So now crypto is going to have to do the same thing. And I am not satisfied remotely with that answer, because, first of all, to me, the existing approach to AML KYC it's a failed regime. I think it's actually just like the war on drugs, where like at some point back in the day, people had good intentions, but then decades later of all that, $1 trillion wasted, a generation of young black men thrown in jail, Latin America turned into these narco states, and like more people do drugs now than ever. And finally, 50 years later, we're like, yeah, maybe we need a new approach. I think AML KYC in finance is the same exact thing. It doesn't work. You can just look up the statistics as to how much money gets laundered through the existing system. It's astonishingly high. Its costs are borne by the exact kind of people that supposedly we're all supposed to try to help, like lower income people, marginalized communities, the unbanked, etc. Um, and second of all, I think this goes to like a philosophical question as to what kind of a society that you live in. And, I'll tell you like a joke exchange I used to have with my dad. I'm an immigrant. My family came here from Iran when I was very young to escape the horrible regime and oppressive government there. Um, but back then there was a lot of crime in New York, and my dad, as like every immigrant, he had a longing for the home country, and sometimes he would say something like, "Oh, like here you got to worry about being pickpocketed or mugged in New York. Back in Iran, you could like walk down the street with a barrel full of cash and nobody would bother you." And I actually don't know if that was true, but I would be like, "Well, why is it that nobody would bother you?" He'd be like, "Well, if they even like suspect that you robbed someone, they might chop off your arm." And that was an effective
Hmm.
deterrent for many kinds of robbery. And it's probably true, right? But I don't want to live in a society where we say, well, we have to prevent any bad person from doing anything through the financial system, because the costs and consequences of that to me are far worse. And I think crypto is going to force this issue. I think particularly things like Bitcoin are going to force this issue, because as we're seeing today, some governments are trying to cram it into the existing AML KYC approach. All that does is force people to get better at using non-custodial wallets and non-custodial solutions, and or drive people to use services offered in countries where they have more sensible approaches to compliance.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The potential of something that's so simple like public key cryptography, where you can, like you said, just sign a message, versus just the mountains and mountains of paper that's digitized, and you got to scan it, and then your location is intercepted. And I mean, it really is. If you think about how scary and crazy this world could be with all this AI stuff that Alec brought up and you were mentioning, it does seem like this is a relatively elegant and simple solution.
Alec actually is the one who freaked me out. I was at an event not that long ago where he gave a talk about how much surveillance there already is in the world today.
That was my goal.
Yes, so, well done. But I do think, as other people have pointed out, like cryptography is like the last great form of impenetrable defense left. So I am hoping that, partly because of the crypto industry has now created business models for new kinds of cryptography. Before cryptography research, you would always have like governments and defense agencies are doing it. But now that we have this $1 trillion+ industry that relies on it, I am hoping that like greater advances in things like zero knowledge proofs will help us be able to still interact with each other online in a way that's trustworthy and safe, but you don't have to then surrender all privacy.
Is it too late in the show to try to maybe balance the proof of work idea versus proof of stake, where Ethereum has gone? Some of the other chains. Do you have any general thoughts on that? Does Infura scare you?
I think I love both proof of work and proof of stake, but I actually particularly love the fact that Bitcoin is now really the only major proof of work blockchain left. I think
Yeah.
proof of work's ties to the physical economy as far as the energy usage concerned, um, and the fact that it separates power in the network from those who validate transactions to whales who own a lot of coins. I think that really is the perfect kind of decentralization for a apolitical and censorship resistant type of money, which is what Bitcoin is to me and always will be primarily. But I also think it's great that Ethereum, which has a much more expansive and ambitious roadmap, transition to proof of stake. There are reasons why proof of stake is also good, but proof of stake is much more prone to centralization, and a lack of diffusion of power, which is the number one thing I find disturbing in every other proof of stake blockchains, is that a lot of them they raise money from insiders and investors, then they launch a network, and now all of those insiders are staking. So your investors are the people who are now your primary validators of transactions, and this problem might never go away because they're the ones earning the staking return. So one of the other things I like about Ethereum was that the decision to begin with a proof of work chain led to a much more balanced coin distribution. So then by the time it switched to staking, you didn't have this problem where literally it's like one VC is 15% of the ETH stake. You do have the problem of the staking service providers. Some of that will never go away so long as they're custodians and custodial exchanges. They're natural staking providers. But I'm actually hopeful that more decentralized liquid staking solutions like Rocket Pool will help diminish some of that.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah. So if you want to be an Ethereum staker, you need two things. One, you need 32 ETH, which not everybody has. And two, you actually need to know how to run a staking node, which is not a trivial thing because things that Ethereum staking rewards it rewards uptime, and they're actually punishments. So if your node isn't always up and running and it doesn't always do what it's supposed to, then you might actually lose money. You might lose an opportunity to make money, or you might be slashed. So like I run my own Bitcoin node on a Raspberry Pi right here. It's one of my favorite little pieces of gadgets in my home. Um, I I wouldn't try to run an Ethereum node. One, it's more complicated. Two, like what if my internet goes out? So what most people end up doing is hiring service providers to do this for them, or like this is where things like Lido come in, the liquid staking providers, where like you send your coins to a smart contract that they control. They take care of everything else. In exchange for that, they take a fee, and then they pass the rest of the reward on to you. Rocket Pool is sort of like a hybrid solution where people who are willing to take on the challenge of setting up their own staking nodes provide that service along with some of the 32 ETH, and then random schmoes like me contribute the other 32. So it's not as ideal as everybody who's staking running their own infrastructure, but it's also not as bad as everybody just concentrating on a few infrastructure providers.
The stable coins, to me, like you mentioned earlier, I think that was a surprise by many, of how big that became. It's 150 billion right now. It's been higher, I think, even as far as market cap. And that's a drop in the bucket still of, global assets or money market funds or euro dollars.
Right.
And you're talking tens of trillions of dollars. So I don't know if this is something you study, but like if you look at like the developing world, the use of stable coins versus say something like the use of lightning, have you looked into that at all? So like which is maybe better for the mass adoption?
Yeah, I have looked at it, and we actually discuss it in class all the time because I have a lot of international students, and this is a topic of interest to them. I think there's a couple of things that a lot of people who are like deep in the weeds of crypto should remember. One is that everyone on planet Earth knows what a dollar is and probably wants some. The vast majority of those people don't know what a Bitcoin is, and even if you try to explain it to them, that doesn't mean that they're going to want some. Perhaps someday they will, but today, to them, this idea that you can on your mobile phone in places like Argentina and Turkey could now get dollars in a way that like otherwise it's a duffel bag full of cash. It's very appealing. So
the network effect of the dollar is unmatched.
Unmatched.
I think that's a very, very safe statement to say.
And I've never looked at these things as rivals. I just feel like every person you onboard with a stable coin is one more person who, if the US keeps running massive deficits, has high inflation, or even like defaults in a debt ceiling debate, that person who owns a stable coin is a lot more likely to buy Bitcoin or ETH or whatever than somebody that has neither. So to me, it's always been the real competition is between this tokenized way to own assets versus like the account bank based way to do it. And to me, like every person we onboard, even people who are buying shit coins and NFTs that are all going to go to zero, I think that's great because like that's the gateway drug to Bitcoin, to ETH, even to like dollar stable coins and to real art on the blockchain or whatever people are doing with NFTs. And I do think the stablecoin thing is really going to take off, in part because like if you spend time studying how pathetically bad our existing payment systems are, most of them have really not changed much in like 150 years architecturally. Like they're all mobile and digital and cloud and whatever, but it's actually the same exact movement of money as the days when people would use telegrams to send the first wire transfers. So I think it's going to really take over. It's also obviously like governments are much more, well, the governments whose stable coins are being bought are much more amenable to that going mainstream than something like Bitcoin.
I was doing an update for my little base money thing, and it's not on this table. It's over like 500 now pesos on the black market, Argentinian pesos, and whereas the official rate is, I don't know, maybe 5 times less than that. So it really it's like every day. And Turkey, of course, as you mentioned as well, is another one.
Since you brought up Argentina, one of my favorite stats is people like to tell me like Bitcoin is a terrible store of value because it was at $69,000 and now it's at $27,000. Year over year, Bitcoin is up in Argentinian peso.
Yeah, and lira too. I think there's never really a bear market in
Yeah.
those currencies.
And you know, those people don't get to just like call up JP Morgan and open a US bank account and get dollars. But they can
Yep.
get stable coins and they can get Bitcoin.
I wanted to say it on the show. I can't find it. The official, I think, is somewhere at 200, 200, 220, and the black market is over 500 right now. So it's perfect example. I think perfect example, as you said. And I never really thought about it that way. Like that person that holds a tokenized asset will most likely get into Bitcoin after that. That's a very good point.
And that's my, we didn't even talk about central bank digital currencies. But they probably will happen. How, when, the how and the when, I don't know. The why, there's actually a very legitimate reason why they should happen and many illegitimate reasons why we should be concerned. But that too, like, that's going to be, you know, if a government wants to onboard every citizen to learning how to use a digital wallet that will be key based, because that's the only way a CBDC will actually do anything useful is if it's key based. um, then I say bring it on. And then when that government probably starts using the programmable nature of that tokenized money to do various kinds of censorship or other nefarious behavior, once again, that will increase the appeal of Bitcoin. And I say this because I hear this from people all the time, like, wouldn't a digital dollar issued by the Fed um, diminish the appeal of Bitcoin? And that's when I realized that too many people think that part of Bitcoin that's appealing is that it's digital money, as opposed to the things that those of us on the inside appreciate, which is that it's decentralized, it's apolitical, it's the inflation is algorithmically controlled, and so on.
I am doing a CBDC tracker actually with the Human Rights Foundation.
Huh.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a possible on ramp, but it's also a total possible hellscape as well. Do you have any other thoughts about how those might be adopted and if that could be like a bad thing?
I'm fully on board with you about there being a lot more, there's a lot more downside than upside. I mean, I do think there's upside. Like, I love cash. I love physical cash because you know, like, we take this for granted, but if you're paying someone with a dollar bill, it is self-custodial. It's private, instant, free payment of fiat currency, which is not what you get if you're using Venmo or a credit card. And the optimist in me says, like, yeah, and if you design a CBDC to be those things, which technically you can get most of the way there, it can never be fully free. Nothing on the internet, as Alec knows better than me, is ever going to be fully private, but you could get most of the way there. It's just that I don't really trust governments to not give into the temptations to use it as a tool for control and surveillance. um so and I think the proof is what you just said, Matt. I mean, look at, like, China is one of the most eager countries ever to roll out its DCEP because it perfectly ties into their surveillance state and their social credit system. You know, the one thing missing from the social credit system is money. So, voila. Um, the one silver lining in places like the West, and I say this as someone who's kind of worked on this with the people. I know some of the people in the central banks and governments and policy think tanks who've been trying to tackle this, is that many of the CBDC design considerations are actually political questions. Like, you could design a CBDC that completely does away with most of our private payment infrastructure in the US. You just, in a world where I can send you digital Fed tokens peer to peer, do we really need Visa? Do we really need PayPal? Do we really need JP Morgan? Um, and even how lending happens, how banking works, etc. All of which is to say, the political weight of this, because it's just such a economy altering thing, that's going to slow down the pace of adoption. And you're already seeing, like, the political pushback right now. Like, in the US, you have um, Republicans that are becoming increasingly anti-CBDC, but there's also a lot of companies banks, payment providers who are lobbying behind the scenes, who are like, hey, this is America. And in America, like, there's a reason we don't have a public option for health insurance, right? Like, we generally have a philosophy that the government does not introduce solutions that wipe away the private sector. In Europe, and the political debate is a little bit different, but it is intense. So I actually don't think we're going to see any kind of CBDC in a major developed world in the foreseeable future. And that is a good opening for both stablecoins and crypto to take market share.
On the CBDC topic, last night, or yes, yeah, I guess it was last night, Ron DeSantis, right? He was interviewed by Elon Musk and moderated by David Sachs, first, I think, presidential candidate to announce on Twitter. And one of the topics was Bitcoin, right? And so I wasn't listening, but to paraphrase, he said, the reason the current government doesn't like it is you can't control it, and in my government, you'll be free to use Bitcoin. And so coming off of your statements about the political discussions around CBDCs, I think you're right, right? There's political decisions about the instantiation of a CBDC, but then there's the tides, right? So whoever is in control, in theory, right, could have more say over the management of that CBDC. And what I think was really interesting about the Canadian trucker thing was you had people that really perhaps didn't have a strong opinion or weren't involved in that particular debate, right? Like all over the world, who were seeing the censorship of it and who took an interest in the censorship more than they took an interest in the actual debate that the truckers were bringing to Ottawa. And so I think where we're getting, and what I'd love you to talk about is the fact that Bitcoin is opt-in and permissionless. Does that mean it's above political debate, and that all of us who are debating about Bitcoin are just one rung below, right? Or is Bitcoin a political football too, right? Is it going to be like CBDC is a political issue?
Well, that's a fascinating question, because Bitcoin also has its own politics internally, which is often mostly about what I consider almost irrelevant details. Like we didn't touch on, like, what's going on with ordinals and other things on Bitcoin. I think they're great. I think they actually expand the utility of what Bitcoin achieved. And to give you an example, you held up a copy of my book earlier, and Matt said, like, oh yeah, it's scarcity. Well, I created an ordinal that is just a cover JPEG of the book along with a hash of the ebook. So I use this censorship-resistant, decentralized global infrastructure to commit to the content in that book forever, which I think is a pretty powerful thing. But I do think the politics of Bitcoin is ultimately not as important to the outcomes as is when you compare it to, like, what's happening with money and banking and whatnot. I mean, banking is like blatantly a political institution. Banks literally cannot exist unless the government blesses them into existence with a charter, which then means that if you're a banker, push comes to shove, it's the government you care about, not your customers. Your customers cannot make your business disappear overnight, but as the people at Signature Bank realize, the government can make your business disappear overnight. And I think of a lot of things as like this yin and the yang. And I think the Canadian truckers is actually a greater example of this, which is that the more governments, even in relatively free countries like the US or Canada, try to control the population, which I think most people would agree is happening now. That doesn't seem to be the issue of debate. Certainly after a period like COVID, it's obvious that governments, they think they're doing the right thing, right? Which might actually make it more scary. But so the more governments try to do that, and the more they try to do it via money, which is the other disturbing trend. And the Canadian trucker thing is a perfect example. Like, if you think they're breaking the law, just go arrest them and take them to jail. But what increasingly happens is that there are lines that the government does not want to cross vis-a-vis the legal system. So it uses the financial system. And we see this even in the US with, like, cannabis business is perfectly legal in most states now, or many states. Can't get a bank account. It wasn't that long ago that OnlyFans tried to punish perfectly legal sex workers who were using the platform. And we found that they basically did it because like 2, 3 banks tried to impose that on them. And this is one, it distresses me. And I tell my friends, like, whatever your opinion of anything is that I just talked about, do you really think Jamie Dimon should be the one who gets to decide whether a legal sex worker gets to make money? I think the state and federal legislatures should decide that, and then the courts weigh in on whether that decision was constitutional. But increasingly, it's like the people in the financial apparatus who get to decide that. And the dangers of that is you don't have the same due process protections. And obviously, like, if OnlyFans had kicked off all the sex workers, what are they going to do, right? Like, they're going to join and sue and take a case to the Supreme Court? Probably not. So to me, the yin and the yang is, as these kinds of methods of control get increasingly tightened, society as a whole says we need a backup plan. We need an alternative. We need something, some way that this kind of control can't just suffocate us all. And I think that's crypto. And that's to your point, Alex, that, like, I think I know people who are like, yeah, I don't know about like the Canadian truckers or vaccines and stuff, but I think it's kind of crazy that they just like took their money before anybody was arrested, or most people were arrested. So this, I think, is the like one of the killer features of crypto, is that it is moving in the opposite direction of the rest of the political system.
Can I ask you about Iran?
Yeah.
Pretty crazy there last 6 months or so. So I'm doing my first quarter update. It takes like a month for central banks to publish their data for the last month. But I do these quarterly updates on all the base money around the world. And I haven't been able to get on the Bank of Iran's website in literally like 9 months.
Well,
It's pretty wild. Like, try it yourself. I mean, I usually go in with VPNs and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I try different VPNs, and I know the nation for a while was like literally on fire, but I couldn't get on the website, and I still can't get on the website today, which I think is just kind of an interesting little tie into our monetary discussion. But that's obviously not nearly as important as what's happening there. I mean, the women's rights and everything. I mean, has that been something that you've been following?
Yes, closely, and it's been actually been very inspiring in a lot of ways to see what a lot of the women there did, and the risks that they personally took and continue to take. And they actually succeeded in shifting a lot of the windows. So I'm told that, like, you see a lot more women there who are more comfortable not covering their hair in certain situations, or covering it less and standing up for themselves. And Iran has always been this interesting paradox of a place, because while it has this horrible, corrupt, evil, theocratic regime that's been in charge for my entire life, it has a highly educated population. Iran has one of the highest literary rates in the region. There's a strong tradition of people going to college and university and pursuing graduate degrees, both internally and externally. So it's been this weird clash, of, like, normally you think of a theocracy as this like backwards culture where nobody knows anything, but that hasn't been the case in Iran. Beyond that, it's also a place where people are actually quite passionate about Bitcoin and crypto and stable coins and all of it. And I've heard stories that I would not be surprised if the Iranian government is directly mining Bitcoin right now.
Really?
This is pure speculation, but my general assumption now is that if you are any country that has economic troubles, has been sanctioned to oblivion by the US and the West, and has energy, my general assumption is you're mining some Bitcoin. Small, right? I've definitely I've heard credible stories of, like, government agents come and seize someone's home mining rig and then go install it in their own home or in the office. But if you think about it, like if you have an abundance of energy and you've been locked out of the global banking system and your economy is struggling, why wouldn't you mine Bitcoin? And certainly in the past 6 months, I think the U.S. government has done one of the most effective possible advertising campaigns for the rest of the world to adopt crypto, because our government acts like they're really scared of this, which you could imagine if you're in Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, China, Russia, you're like, oh, the Americans are really scared of this crypto thing. I guess that means it works. Let me get into it.
Do you think that there could be a connection between the eventual improvement of women's rights there, but also the monetary freedom for crypto? Do you think there could be a link there?
Absolutely. Not just in Iran, but if you, and I'm going to tie this back to like when people come at me and be like, oh, isn't crypto just very popular for illicit activity? Well, there are countries where women are legally not allowed to get a bank account, but they can get Bitcoin. And we've heard some stories of like women in places like Afghanistan trying to turn to it.
Mhm.
Like all anecdotal, right? Like there's no widespread adoption anywhere, but I think the philosophical points that we were talking about, the censorship resistance of crypto is a enabler of oppressed people everywhere.
I don't know. Do you think it's getting any better now, just in general, again, or are they really cracking down?
I'm no expert, I should say. They're always cracking down, but then the people are always finding new sophisticated ways to work around it. So, like the things that I will tell you, the internet is highly restricted in Iran. Most people are really good at using VPNs. Someone like my mother, who still keeps in touch with friends and family back home. Some new app comes out of nowhere that people are able to use to make phone calls from like the US, or voice calls from the US to Iran. And then after some time, it becomes too popular. The government figures it out and shuts it down. And then my mom's like, yeah, so and so app is not working anymore. But somebody else told me about a new app that will. And this actually gives me great hope in some ways for our digital futures, which is like, it's just bits of data moving through the internet, and at a certain point it's too difficult to stop people from doing whatever it is that they want to do with them.
Yeah, it's an interesting area. I mean, I can tell you, I've been through like 60 central banks, and even all the Arab countries, they will use the Gregorian calendar. Iran is the only one that has their Persian calendar. Like I have to figure out how I can match it up when I do these reports, because they use, it's like, year 1400 or something
Well, yeah, but it
on their
is.
calendar.
I'm going to put on my like Iranian pride hat for a second. It is. It's not a lunar calendar, and it is a. Although Iran is a Muslim country, we have our own solar calendar, which I believe goes back to the days of Zoroastrianism, because it was a sun god.
I know that there are some differences as well in the
Yeah,
Persian
yeah. The
calendar.
most other countries in that region, including not just, I'm pretty sure the Arab countries, even Israel, they use. I mean, they use both, but they have a lunar calendar, which, as you know, has a tendency to like bounce around and get out of whack. So Iran has a solar calendar, and the new year is the first day of spring.
Yeah, in
Which,
March.
yeah,
It's 22nd, 21st of
that's
March,
right.
if I recall my.
Very good.
So only from central bank websites I can tell you this.
Money, as you know, like money is actually a great way to understand cultures and societies, right? Like all of our
Yeah,
history, all of our mythology is often infused with the money that we use. And I have a lot of this stuff in the book about like, even like, I'm fascinated, like I'm always googling where the names of different currencies come from, because they tend to be old and full of history.
It's something, I noticed as soon as I got the book, and I emailed you about it when I got it. I mean, so there's uh, I'm going to finally put my English major to use. So there's a Yeats poem called The Second Coming, and it has a very famous and appropriated line about slouching towards Bethlehem. And that was the title of an essay by Joan Didion that is really a very pessimistic view of the kind of utopian vision of San Francisco in the 60s.
Yes.
And there was a lot of utopia at the time, right? And there was an underbelly to that. And there's a image of like a 6-year-old girl who's given LSD in that essay. And then you start your book slouching towards a digital Bethlehem. I think that's how you put it.
Yeah.
And that's a really evocative, and I think that phrase unto itself is pessimistic, but your book is really optimistic. I also think there's a parallel to like the tech utopia of San Francisco more recently, and the obvious underbelly that we see there. It's not even underbelly, right? Like there's, anyone who's been to San Francisco in the last 5 years has seen there's really a dark side to amassing sort of a techno power in one area. And so why did you choose that, right? And what's like, I'd love you to expand on that a little.
So I love the Joan Didion, the book of essays with that title. Also, I think around the same time in 1968, Robert Kennedy cited that poem in a now very famous New York Times op-ed, and he references another line from that poem, which is that the center cannot hold, which is a line that we crypto people, we say the center cannot hodl, but it's true to our hearts. And I used it because the narrative of the book is that if we leave digitization alone as is, by which I mean no crypto, then we are heading to this very dystopian world where you have severe concentration of power and wealth and a lot of other bad things that people sort of act like, oh, well, I guess like these algorithms that are completely opaque are going to control our search results, what food we eat, who we match with on a dating app, and what Uber we take. And to me, crypto is the sort of the Deus ex machina. It's the ghost in the machine. It's a thing that came out of left field unexpectedly that can, in time, address some of these problems. Nothing's perfect, but with more transparency, more user control, decentralization. And an idea I've only come to recently, Alec, after I wrote the book, is that one of the other things that's fascinating about crypto is that it is a technology that like nobody saw coming. By which I mean, if you think about mobile communication, space travel, artificial intelligence, robots, there are very few things that are considered tech breakthroughs in the world today that you couldn't read about in science fiction going back 50 years, if not 150 years. But this idea of decentralized networks for trust building and digital scarcity and smart content, programmable values, can't find it in a science fiction book anyway. So it is magical in that sense, and my hope is that it will be the thing that prevents the digital second coming.
Well said. Cheers to that.
Very interesting. Well, Omid, listen, my baby might be able to hear in the background. She got to put her to bed soon. But as we close it here, thanks a lot. Really, really interesting stuff. Where can our listeners and viewers find more about what you're doing?
Anyone interested in my books, you can find them at Amazon and other fine retailers. You can just search for my name, Omid Malekan. I am on Twitter at MalekanOms, MALEKANOMS. And if you just go to omidmalekan.com, you can see I do various kinds of other blogging and thought leadership.
It was a pleasure talking with you today. Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation too.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.